right? The Trojan song. So here we go. Ladies, if you remember any of the moves, I welcome you to. But you may want to stretch out first, okay? All right, here we go. Hail to you, Auburn, loyal to liberty. Hail to you, Auburn, marching to victory. Loyal Trojan general, march us as we raise sword. Hail to you, Auburn, we're in this day. Is looking for more people to be on the next All School reunion, which is planned in 5 years. They had planned to do the All School reunion every 5 years. Just so you know, I've never been to one of these because I was too young. But, I was a 1996 grad. I'm almost a 30-year grad, so I'm officially old enough to come to this. You set the bar pretty high, but we really want to encourage you. So see one of these ladies if you'd like to volunteer. Plus, you already put your email and your phone number, so I'm betting that you're going to hear from them. And then also, we'd like to invite Sue to give a little treasurer's report, which she was really excited to do, by the way.
We have $2,254.70 in our treasury.
We are collecting some donations, and then also, hopefully you bought your button. There's going to be a big drawing. I'm drawing for $1,300 tomorrow. You don't have to be present to win. You're going to have a little time to be able to claim your prize. So now, before we get into Michael Perry's presentation, which I'm really excited to hear, we wanted to do a little acknowledgement. So I'm going to ask you to stand up again, but it's not going to be for very long. So if you graduated anytime 1950 or before, we'd like you to stand up. If you graduated anytime before 1950, okay. We've got one gal in the house. When did you graduate? 1946. We've got some prize this year, since she is the furthest back, the most experienced New Auburn alumni. Okay, we're giving away some little gift cards, so Joanne. Now, not everybody gets a gift certificate. Okay, so if you graduated in the 60s, let's stand up and give it for our class of 1960s. Anywhere in there? Right. Awesome. Okay. Now you can sit down. Now the 70s. Where are there? You guys are looking good. How about the 80s? Awesome. Good job. I don't have an award for the loudest, but that's probably it. Okay. How about anybody that graduated with me in the 90s? Now, familiar faces. Okay. How about the 2000s? Anybody from? Yeah! Okay, so nobody in the 20s. How about 2000, anybody? 2020? 2020. Anybody graduate more recently than 2020? Okay, we got a card for that. And thank you for being here. Now, I would like everybody to stand up, whoever worked at the school, whether you are a teacher, a paraprofessional, in the office. Let's see our staff members stand up. Okay, now we got a little prize. We got a little prize for the staff. Anybody work at the school for 40 or more years? 40 or more years. Okay. And then with our staff members, we had a few items donated. This is back in 1994. They won the conference championship. I got to be cheerleader on that team. Right? So we got a couple more sweatshirt and a t-shirt here. So I would like to know the next longest tenure of staff members. So anybody work here 35 or more years, stand up. Way to be decisive. I might want to borrow it. Judy! You worked here 35, how many? 37?
I think we have one.
I already ran this morning, but I'm getting a few more steps in, so that's good. Awesome. So we are to Michael Perry. We're even early, Michael. Are you ready? I'm really excited to introduce Michael Perry. Just before we get to his formal introduction, which I'll read, I warned him. When I was in high school, we had a mock crash. And me and my classmates were in this mock crash, okay? And all of us were just hoping that Michael Perry would be the one to be able to rescue us. I think my friend Deb Collins, now Deb Bjorkstrand, won that, which we were really mad about. But you did have a little bit more hair back then. We still love you. So you guys, we are so fortunate. I mean, New Auburn is a very special place. But this place has been brought to life and shared with thousands, probably millions of people because of the stories that Michael has shared. And I just think it's so great, especially with population 485, that we get to read about the people that we know. So here's the formal introduction. Michael Perry is a farm boy turned humorist, New York Times best-selling author, volunteer firefighter, first responder, corporate speaker, and amateur snowplow driver. From rural Wisconsin, known for leaving audiences laughing and nodding and sometimes getting misty from his reflective, roughneck takes on life in rural America. Perry's best-selling books include the volunteer firefighter memoir, Population 485, subsequently adapted for the stage, Truck, A Love Story, Coop, Visiting Tom, and Montaigne in Barn Boots. Among his other 20-plus titles are The Scavengers for young readers, his novel, The Jesus Cow, the essay collections, Peaceful Persistence, Million, Billion, and Hunger, and his most recent book, the deeply powerful novella, 40 Acres Deep. Raised on a small Midwestern dairy farm, right here in New Auburn, Perry put himself through nursing school while working on a ranch in Wyoming, then detoured into writing. He lives with his wife and 2 daughters in rural Wisconsin, where he still makes an occasional call with a local volunteer fire and rescue service. He performs widely as a humorist. His live humor albums include Never Stand Behind a Sneezing Cow, great, really great advice, and the Clodhopper Monologues. He tours with his band, The Longbeds, and lives online at sneezingcow.com. You can actually book Mike as a speaker if you visit sneezingcow.com/bookmike. Without further ado, Michael Perry.
Well, thanks. It's always awkward when you gotta come home and tell your stories. I get far more nervous for events like this than I do much bigger events. Partly because many of you knew me growing up and knew me when I was living here in the 90s and early 2000s. And then the last thing I would say before I get going is that if you have any questions about any of the stories I tell today, my brother Jack is here and he will correct them. I also just quickly want to say, I can tell you that millions of people have not read my books. I'll get to that towards the end a little bit, but being privileged enough to try to tell just part of the New Auburn story. But I had a very good adjustment one time. I have this weird career that I, first of all, never planned and never really tried for. It just kind of happened. But it's this weird career in that I am not famous. I've worked with famous people, written about famous people. I know what real fame is, and I am not famous. But my name is recognizable in certain very discreet circles. And so when you're at that level, if you will, what happens to me all the time is someone will say, well, this is Michael Perry. And they'll say, oh, are you Michael Perry, the author? And I'll say, well, yeah. And they say, well, I haven't read your books. And this happens a lot. So at some point I thought, I gotta come up with an answer because we're all a little uncomfortable now. Because the person always realizes what they just said. And so for years, they would say, well, I haven't read your books. And I would say, that's okay. Millions of people haven't. And we could all have a nice little chuckle and just move on, plus it was true. And this worked great until one time I spoke at a big university, and I was the featured writer or something, and they had a literal wine and cheese reception for me. Now, I don't drink, never have, so I didn't do much with the wine, but it was in Illinois, and I took great pride in showing those people how to eat cheese. But at some point, I got introduced to the chancellor of the university. She was very pleasant, but a lot of letters after her name, and someone said, well, this is Michael Perry, and that particular time, and the drive was long enough that I took my buddy Frank with me. My friend Frank has known me forever. He knows me for the real person I am. He was a mentor of mine. I wouldn't have ever made it without his help. But he was along with me just to drive, and so he was standing beside me. And Frank is a tall, skinny guy with wire-rimmed glasses. He looks like he's read a lot of books, which indeed he has. And he's standing beside me, and I get introduced to the chancellor of this university. And the person introducing me said, this is Michael Perry. And the chancellor said, oh, are you Michael Perry, the author? And I said, well, yes. And she said, well, I haven't read your books. And I said, that's okay, millions of people haven't. And we all had a nice little chuckle, and then I felt a little shot to my ribs, and it was my friend Frank, and he leaned over into my ear and said, well, actually, Mike, it would be billions. That's true, I don't know that any of you can point it out. So while I was thinking about what I might say or read today, I've got plenty of things that I do in my little talks and my humor, and I'll maybe do a couple of those. But I wanted to do a few things about New Auburn that aren't necessarily in any of my books. And one of the things I was thinking about when I was looking through some old photos that I have of New Auburn and old postcards is that the way the history happens without us realizing it. I tend to think of the history of New Auburn as these old black and white postcards we dig up on eBay, or there's just wonderful examples of it here, old lunar advances and Chautauqua boats and New Auburn newses. But in fact, history happened while we're not paying attention. And when I went through some of the old files, I found things that I had written that at the time were current events and now suddenly are history. On the way up here, I was telling my friend Tony, who sells our merchandise for us at our events, I said, there'll be a lot of older people here today, a lot of people over 60. Wait a minute, that would be me. So I just thought, I just have a couple of little things. And this first one was, it's just simply, I think it was a report that we wrote after Jamboree Days as a way of thanking our sponsors. And suddenly it's history. Good weather and good turnout contributed to a successful celebration of Jamboree Days in New Auburn last weekend. The fun began Friday night of 2002 with the annual Chautauqua versus New Auburn Fire Department softball game. The game featured more good humor than good hitting, and in keeping with tradition, Chautauqua won handily. Although New Auburn contends the game was called on account of darkness and heavy dew. After everyone gathered under the big tents for food, refreshments, and live music by the Little Big Band, featuring Jerry Lemke and Jeff Roby, it appeared that all differences had been resolved. The weekend included a wide variety of food sales by various community organizations, from barbecue chicken to cotton candy to cheese curds. A special thank you to all the volunteers who manned tables, hauled supplies, and toiled over hot grills and fryers in the heat to keep everyone fed. Proceeds from the food sales went to support various school and community causes, so the steady flow of customers all weekend was very much appreciated. The hard-fought weekend-long softball tournament was won by Gilligan's, just as the rain clouds were finally rolling in late Sunday afternoon. The New Auburn Builders team won the volleyball tournament, and Birchwood won the fire department water fights under sun so hot that spectators gathered around the competition grounds and hoped they would get sprayed. On Saturday, several children's teams enjoyed the New Auburn Area Fire Department's miniature water fights, and the adult teams that participated in the open class water fight provided soggy entertainment for everyone. The children's games and rides were busy all Saturday afternoon, with a brief break for some high wind that thankfully came and went with no damage. The weather for Sunday's parade was bright and sunny. Children and adults gathered in yards, on street corners, and up and down Main Street to wave, enjoy the sights, and hope a little candy might be tossed their way. Music could be heard all weekend. In addition to the Little Big Band on Friday night, Lizard Lips Karaoke gave everyone a chance to be a star on Saturday afternoon. Doc and the interns kept the dance floor packed until the wee hours on Saturday evening. And on Sunday afternoon, the Amy Steinmetz Band made it feel like a true Wisconsin celebration, like playing polka favorites. Sunday's rainstorms held off until the tents had been safely folded, a perfect ending to a great weekend of community spirit and entertainment. So I'm just grateful that I grew up in a place where we had those little get-togethers, and all of a sudden that thing that I wrote about that had just happened last weekend has now happened almost 25 years ago. And it's preserved in our memories, and at least those of you, some of you don't remember Saturday evening, I know, because I was there. Another little piece that I found that I thought might have some historical relevance is that the New Auburn Fire Department celebrated its 100-year anniversary some time ago, and I was asked to speak at that. And so I thought I'd read just a couple of little excerpts from that speech, because I had forgotten. Looking back over 100 years, I don't know where to begin, so I will begin just over 1 year ago, on a hot night in July of 2004, when one of our longest-serving firefighters, a man who, for the record, has a little trouble keeping both of his eyeballs pointing in the same direction, responded to a call late at night. You never know when the pager goes off what danger you might face, and as we ran across the pitch-black yard to the house where we had been called, this man, we call him the one-eyed beagle, ran smack into a big old black bear. Now the good news is, the bear was made of plywood. It had two little baby bears right behind it. It was still a surprise. I was a little ahead of the beagle, and I heard this whack thump right behind me. When we got within range of the porch light, I looked back over my shoulder, and both the beagle's eyes, this one and that one, were pretty wide. some of the guys on our department hunt bears, and they're trying to get the one-eyed beagle to go with them this year since he's proven he's got a nose for bear. If he does it, we're going to have to pitch in and get him one of those radio tracking collars. That way we can track him down if he follows the wrong eye. So over the years, as I've toured around the country talking about the book Population 45, people will refer to the characters in the book, or how do you come up with these characters? And I always stop, and they say, they're not characters, they're my neighbors. And I tried to write honestly about this place, but I also tried to write respectfully. And I also would always go to great lengths to point out that, taking Population 485 as an example, mine was one of 485 versions of that story. I never assumed that I was some sort of spokesperson. But it was a privilege to write about this place and about some of the folks that I served on the department with. One of my other favorite things about the book Population 45 and about being from New Auburn is that it is about a very specific place, a place very close to my heart. It is about very specific people. I just pointed that out. And yet, I've toured that book all over the U.S., from Duluth to Jackson, Mississippi, from L.A. to New York City. And wherever you go, people relate. They know these people. And my favorite story about that is that I was down in Jackson, Mississippi. I'd done an event, I'd spoken, and then I was signing books at a table. And folks were coming through the line, and they put their copy of Population 485 down. Some of you obviously know who I was referring to in the earlier story about the one-eyed beagle, a one-eyed butcher who's a volunteer firefighter. And I was down in Mississippi, and I'm signing books, and all of a sudden, when you do that, you're looking at the book mostly, but you look up quickly to try and establish some contact and ask where they're from, just so that you have that little second of connection before they move on. And I'm signing, and this guy comes up, and I had my head down, and he just plopped his book down, and I'm opening it to the page I'm going to sign, and all of a sudden, I can feel him lean in really close, and he puts his hands down on either side of me, kind of awkwardly close. And as I slowly bring my eyes up, the first thing I see is the Maltese cross of the local volunteer fire department. Then I look up and I make eye contact, sort of, with him, because his eyes are... And he waits for a beat, and then in the deepest Mississippi accent, which I'm not going to try to do, he goes, "And I'm a butcher." 3 for 3. So we have a lot in common with each other, no matter where we go. Just going to read a couple more paragraphs from that anniversary speech. Those of us currently wearing the uniform of the New Auburn Area Fire Department, as I was speaking currently at that time, are here today thanks to people we never knew. You can find their names written in faded ink between the covers of some musty old book in the back of the village hall, and you can find their names written in granite on gravestones scattered throughout the cemeteries in this village and the surrounding townships. They were real people like us, except that for the most part they probably dressed better and didn't have so many tattoos. And they never once sang karaoke in the Jamboree Days beer tent. But one evening in August of 1905, these people we never knew decided it was time to form an official fire department. And I think it would be fun to talk to them today, show them how it's going, give them a ride in that new pumper, let them play with firefighting toys they couldn't have even dreamed of. And I think it would be fun, not so we could say, look what we've done, but to say, look what you did, what you gave this community. We, the people wearing the uniform today, are not the fire department. We're simply volunteers in a long line of volunteers. There are many people sitting out there in plain clothes who gave their time and took their turn. We take our turn now, but we too will move on. Volunteer firefighters come and go, but the service, the help, your neighbor thing, if you will, is constant. That endures. We'll pass it on in the equipment and in the stories and in the spirit, as we have now for over 100 years. Back in '05, the department had a little 35-gallon chemical engine. Don't let the word engine fool you. I've seen pictures of this thing. And basically, you're talking about a beer pony on a hand cart. When the bell on the school clanged to the fire signal, the village marshal grabbed the engine and literally ran with it to the scene. He got a buck a call, and this was before tennis shoes. But I bet when he heard that old bell clang, he felt the same mix of nervousness and excitement we feel when our pagers go off. And I think it's neat that two of our longest serving members, Chief Ernie Sylvester and Brad Lotz, both served with a man named Ivan Bolden. When Mr. Bolden joined the department in 1926, they were still using that original chemical pumper. And so as long as someone still shows up to take the calls, and as long as someone hangs around after the last hose is hung to weave the new stories into the old stories, we'll always have those threads of history that reach back 100 years and more. And I'll pause now just also to thank Chief Official and the current roster of folks that continue to weave those threads of history. Some of you younger folks may not recall, but once upon a time, the greatest threat this nation faced was a thing called Y2K. On December 31st, 1999, all the members of the new Auburn area fire department got together down at the fire hall for New Year's Eve, just so we were ready in case the water tower blew up. Or the chief needed help resetting his wristwatch. We had a big old folding table set up and covered with food, taco dip, shrimp with ketchup and horseradish sauce, Texas beans, smoked carp, that was my contribution, and a big old Nesco roaster the size of a Buick full of prime rib. We sat around telling lies and playing cards and watching Tommy Boy. And at 11 p.m., we tuned in to watch the ball drop in Times Square. Remember, that was quite a deal, sitting there with our little crew and our little hall, watching those thousands of people whooping it up in Manhattan. We hung around pretty late, hoping maybe we'd get a chance to see an alien spaceship or hose down some anarchists. At around 2 a.m., one of the guys went off to sleep on the bench seat in the bumper. We gave him about 15 minutes to drift off. Then we tied his shoelaces together and turned the siren on. But I remember looking around the hall at all those friendly, laughing faces, and I thought then what I think now. If trouble's coming, big, small, or goofy, ain't nobody I'd rather face it down with than the new Auburn area volunteer fire. I just had a ton of things that I thought I could maybe cover today, but time and your chairs will keep me limited. One thing I did want to mention is that I can write all day long and never convey what it means to have a community like this. Many of you know that our family, our mom just passed, and just the way that this community gravitated to that quiet woman, also a member of the New Auburn Area Fire Department, responding to calls back in the day, her big old Lincoln, with her little hair bun sticking up over the seat. And she was there the day that the guy that I just called Tricky hit the laundromat. I don't know if everybody remembers. You know, occasionally you run into the laundromat. And, I just remember he was cussing, and my mom was trying to work on him to help him, and he just kept dropping F-bombs. And I snapped and went over there and got down on one knee, and I said, "Hey, that's my mom. You don't talk to her that way." And he said, "I'm sorry." But I think just watching folks in the last couple of weeks be kind and supportive to my little family speaks to me of what New Auburn is about. I was thinking about things that you can do when you go to a school this small that you don't necessarily get to do if you go to a bigger school. One of my favorite stories, I was now again, my brother's here, so do check in with him, but I was a good kid in the sense, I don't think I was evil, but I was, and I didn't want to get in trouble because the Perrys had a good reputation. So I was kind of that guy that would find the person who didn't mind getting into trouble and go, you know, if you would do A, B would happen. And there was always someone, Greg Hughes, who was willing to go do that. And one of my favorite small town stories is the day that we hid a Phi Ed class. We were in the old gym over there. That old gym with, remember the killer lunch tables that folded down? Yeah, but occasionally you lose a child. That whole contraption and fingers and whatever else. But we were lifting weights, and we had a new Fayette teacher. The poor guy was a little bit in over his head, and we were supposed to lift weights on the little weight room on the stage. They built it up there on the old stage. And I didn't really want to lift weights that day. And there was a door, some of you remember, high up on the stage. And I figured out a way to, I don't know if we used a ladder or if we just did pull-ups, but I said, hey, you guys, what if everybody hid up in the little room there? And then I went and stood on top of the offices where I could see the teacher, and they all hid, and I watched him come out and look around the weight room. He even looked under the weight bench, which I was like, there's only 12 of us, but I promise we're not all under the weight bench. And then I watched as he walked through the gym all the way down to the locker room, obviously checking for in the locker room, and then he came back out, and it wasn't until that moment that I realized that this whole ruse was more brilliant than I thought, because my idea was just to hide for a little while. Then I realized, wait, he can't go to his boss, the superintendent, and say, I lost the Fayette class. So we just hung out until 5 minutes before the end of class, and then I said, okay, you guys come down, and everybody got down, and we all grabbed weights and started going like this. And he just came in and looked at us and never said a word. Some of you, too, it depends on what era you were. You remember going to kindergarten with Mrs. Ahmed, and you had to wear your hanky pinned to your shirt. I'm sure there's some of you. Also, this is a traumatic family story, and I didn't ask his permission to tell it, but I'm going to tell it anyway. My brother Jack went to his first day of kindergarten, and when he came home, he was crying. He was in tears. And my mom said, what's the matter? And little Jack said, the teacher won't let me use my real name. Like, what do you mean? And if you don't know, Jack's real name is Jack. It's not John. But Mrs. Ahmed insisted that he was John, and we would call him John. So my mom, who you all know was a real firebrand, had to seek out Mrs. Ahmed and go, no, he really is Jack. Stop making him cry. I think a piece I wanted to read today, it's actually from the book Truck, but one of the other things that I always loved about being from New Auburn is that I always want to be respectful. I have fond and beautiful memories of this place. But part of what I like too is that a little bit of rough edge is perfectly acceptable. And when I lived in New Auburn, I lived on Main Street, and I realized as I'm about to tell this story, it might be about one of your relatives or maybe even you. Hopefully the statute of limitations has run up. But one of the things I just loved, I had a washing machine that broke during the winter, and I just hauled it up out of the basement and just chucked it in the backyard in a snowbank. I figured I'll take care of it in the spring. And I always said I love living in a place where you can just throw your washing machine in the backyard and nobody really cares. I think that's a lovely, relaxed environment. So I thought I would just read this little section from a book called Truck about some of my former New Auburn neighbors. I'm happy to live in a place where I can chuck a washing machine out my back door and no one judges my behavior unusual. Having said that, I recognize the limits. Shortly after I moved to this village, I was upstairs writing one afternoon when a steady rhythm of thuds gradually intruded on my consciousness. Moving to the back of the house, I peeked through the blinds and saw two teenagers, each armed with a sledgehammer, pounding the bejeebers out of a junk car in the adjacent yard. To compose the approximate image, visualize a pair of manic first-chair kettle drummers slamming madly through a speed metal update of Inagata-Davida. The bulk of their blows were directed against the hood, trunk, doors, and roof, so the clamor was largely metallic. But now and again they'd strike a headlight, and the tinkle of glass came through like a grace note. When they drove the head of the sledgehammer through a window, the safety glass gave out a squeaky crunch and collapsed into a sparkling honeycomb. The boys hammered until every flat surface had been thrashed to a rumble. Then they set aside their tools and, as men are given to do, retreated 3 steps to gaze upon all they had wrought. As long as there's a shot your car might one day spin a wheel, the village board will generally give you dispensation to leave it parked in perpetuity. But when you pulverize your Pontiac to the point that it appears to have been tumble-dried in a rock crusher, you're sending a specific message, and that message is, this vehicle has been rendered irretrievably out of service. Someone complained, and the village board commanded that the vehicle be removed. Time passed, and once again I was drawn from the keyboard by an apocalyptic clamor. First, an engine revving to the point of warping the valve covers. Then the sound of spinning wheels, general acceleration, and the faint rattle of chain links. Finally, the whole buildup terminating in a horrifically conclusive ho-wump. I rose from my desk and assumed my customary position at the upstairs window. The family van had been brought around to the backyard, where a crowd had gathered around the annihilated Pontiac. The van was one of those customized jobs with flare fenders, tinted picture windows, and a silver luggage rack. It had long ago gone to rust and sag, but remained the pride of the family fleet. The van was backed into a position perpendicular to the driver's side of the car. A logging chain was hooked into the frame of the car, somewhere under the passenger side, drawn up and wrapped around the passenger side door, pulled across the rooftop, and then angled down to the rear bumper of the van, where it was secured to the trailer hitch. I was trying to make sense of the arrangement when the van shot forward. Whoa! The pummeled car lurched 6 feet sideways, and the van stalled. The driver restarted the van, backed up, and roared forward again. Whoa! The process repeated itself over and over. They yanked that car around the yard for 10 minutes. And somewhere in there, it hit me. They are trying to flip the car. By passing the chain from the bottom of the car and over the top of the car, and then using the van to jerk the slack, they theorized that enough lateral force would be generated to spin the car on its long axis and flip it wheels up. And on maybe the 37th try, the whole ridiculous project panned out. In a perfect convergence of bounce, torque, and frame snagging topography, the ho-wump was followed by a beat of silence, during which the car teetered on the driver's side, then a much softer wump. As pushed past the tipping point by several excited bystanders, it flopped onto its flattened roof. One wheel spun slowly. After a brief round of congratulatory whooping and fist pumping, the boys moved in with tire irons and started removing lug nuts. And then I understood. They had hatched this great endeavor in order to salvage the 4 tires, which, despite all the violence, still held their air, if not their tread. And for lack of a jack, it had been decided it would be simpler to just flip the car. 5 minutes later, the tires were leaning against the garage and the automobile was being trailered to the salvage yard. What you had here was a full-on testament to the blue-collar work ethic, Yankee ingenuity, the fundamental beauty of main force violence, and the potential upsides of beer and unemployment. I felt the urge to salute. Recently, an outsider not from New Auburn questioned my neighbor Trigby about the local propensity for cockeyed perseverance in the face of absurdity. We up in New Auburn, replied Trigby, walk a more difficult path. So I'm watching the clock again, as I said. So I think I'm going to do 2 just lightly humorous things. One related to population, then just a silly story, and then conclude. This gets back to the whole idea of, it's lovely when folks introduce you and say nice things about you. But when you do what I do, people are also, it turns out not everybody in the world thinks I'm a genius. And there was a time when I had my assistant go onto Amazon and she gathered every single 1-star review I had ever received and I had her put them all in one file and then print them out. And my idea was, well, I'll read through them and it'll be kind of funny, and I'll put together a one-man show about my one-star reviews. And I did indeed do it. It was a show I did called Half a Star. But I got to tell you, by like page 7, it kind of hurt a little bit. And what I've always said, I don't mind, what I do, you're going to get negative reviews in public. That's just part of the job. You got to be able to just suck it up, Sparky. But what I don't mind is if someone doesn't like my book and they write a really excellent takedown of it, that's fine with me. Now, this first review, some of you would know that the original cover of Population 45 had a picture of the Dockles barn on the front of it and me walking in front of a cow crossing sign. And I love that photo. It so captures this area, and I love that red barn has been seen all over the country. But here's what a fellow wrote. He read Population 45, gave it 1 star, and then said, "At first, I was excited to read a book with a W11-4 on the cover. For those of you not familiar with signs, the W designates a warning sign. The numbers denote the sign class. 11 has your animal crossing signs. The 4 designates open range or watch for cows. The sign is found in rural areas. By local standards, however, the P1 post needs to be 7 feet tall between the ground and the bottom of the sign. The sign should also be 13 feet from the edge of the traveled way. If you're wondering why I'm including this useless detail in my book review, you now know how I felt reading the majority of this book." Fair enough. This review I found not upsetting, just confusing. This reader read Population 45, gave me 1 star, and then said, "I plan to read more of his writing." You also plan to hit your finger with a hammer? I don't know. And then this last one I'll share. Again, it didn't bother me so much, but it made me worry about the man in question. This woman read Population 45, gave it 1 star, and said, "This book reminded me of my husband, which I liked, but didn't hold my interest." That's kind of funny, but then there was this chilling little addendum. She said, "Halfway through, I put it away." Someone needs to do a welfare check on that guy. Okay, I'm going to read one piece that has nothing to do with New Auburn, and it's a piece that, it's a deeply personal essay is what it is. And for years I hesitated about reading it in public because it is so deeply personal. But then I did my research and I figured out that no matter where I read this essay, no matter the makeup of the audience, the location, 10% of the audience is completely down with me. And I ain't gonna lie to you, 10% is good enough for me. So I'm gonna share with you some excerpts today from an essay that I wrote about my first ever kidney stone. See, that's my 10% right there. This is for you. The stone struck on a Tuesday evening somewhere along I-94 just east of Minneapolis. First came an upper abdominal twinge, similar to gas pains at dawn, of the sort precipitated by too much bratwurst at bedtime. I do that line in Iowa, nothing. You people get it. Similar to gas pains at dawn, except that no amount of twisting or turning would break it loose. Then it seemed as if my right kidney had been run through with a superheated knitting needle. I was veering in and out of my lane, gasping like a scuppered carp. Struck by this delusion that a hot bath would dissipate the pain, I careened to a motel. I was pallid, shivering, and rolling in sweat as she ran my credit card, but she worked quickly. I staggered to the room, filled the tub full blast, and stripped out of my clothes. By now, based on my experience as a nurse and an EMT, I had pretty much self-diagnosed. 1 in 10 Americans will experience the joy of kidney stones, and the pain I felt was my secret handshake into the club. I dropped into the steaming water and, drawing on my knowledge of anatomy, physics, and desperation, assumed a bizarre position calculated to roll the stone back into the kidney. Maybe 1 minute just to visualize. Or not. After about 15 seconds of lying in scalding water with my butt pushed above the plimsoll mark, I ran up the white flag and dialed 911. So this was in Woodbury, Minnesota, and the first person to come busting through the hotel from the door was a cop paramedic. So he comes through the door, he's got his uniform and his weapon, but he's got his paramedic bag over his shoulder. He stops at the foot of the bed and he looks at me, and I'm lying on top of the bed, and I'm exhibiting the 3 classic signs of a kidney stone. I'm writhing uncontrollably, and that's because it's a smooth muscle contraction issue. You're just trying to get away from it. I'm sweating profusely. And the 3rd classic symptom that I'm exhibiting is I was cussing like a sailor. And if you know family, I was not raised to use those words, but a kidney stone vaporizes your moral, ethical fiber. And I was using most of the fancy words. And so this cop paramedic stops at the foot of the bed and he goes, I bet you got a kidney stone. And I was like, do you reckon, Sparky? And then he said, would you like some morphine? I said, yes, I would. So he gives me a little morphine, and then the ambulance crew shows up, and they bring the cot in, and I don't usually tell this part of the story. They load me up, but I don't usually tell this part of the story, except I know there are some first responders here today, and I'm proud to say that I was that rare patient who requested his emesis bag before he needed it. So emesis is a fancy word for puke, and you usually find out that someone needs a puke bag right about the time you hit your boots. Whereas I had the courtesy to say, you guys got one of them emesis bags? And he said, yeah. I said, I think you probably want to go ahead and get that out. So they drove me to the hospital. I used the emesis bag on the way. It was the first time, I think I'd been on an EMT for 18 years. It was the first time in those years that I'd ever ridden in the back of the rig, lying down, looking up. They get me to the ER, they run me through a CT scan. A little while later, the ER doc shows up at my bedside and he says, well, as you suspected and as we suspected, I've looked at the films, you do indeed have a kidney stone. He said, you have what we call a tweener. And I remember at the time thinking, you know exactly how many years of medical school is required to diagnose a tweener? And he said, well, what I mean by that is, he said, it is quite large, but it has already started its journey, so it's in between. And he said, we got 2 choices. He said, we can give you a bunch of pain meds, send you home, have you drink a lot of fluids and see if you pass it. He said, or as long as you're here, we can just go in up after it. Now, I hadn't practiced as a nurse for quite a while at that point, but I still retain a pretty good understanding of fundamental physical anatomy. And when he said go in up after it, I'm familiar with the route. So I said, I'll tell you what, let's go for a natural birth. So they sent me home with a bucket of Percocet, told me to drink a lot of fluids. It took me 14 days to pass the pain. Everyone always does that nice little moment, really, I was a pretty bad patient. But what happened is I was living on Main Street in New Auburn, and that lovely old house there has really steep wooden stairs. So I'm living all alone, a bachelor, and I'm strung out with Percocet. And I thought, you know, my buddies on the fire department are going to get called here. They're going to find me at the bottom of the stairs with a C-spine fracture crumpled in a Percocet haze. So I think I'm just going to go out. So what I did is I went out to Mom and Dad's farm while I was using all that Percocet. This is just a quick scene of how things went out there. I spent the week at my parents' farmhouse. Now and then the pain would outdistance the Percocet, and I'd try anything. Hot baths, microwave hot packs, incessant pacing to distract myself until the drugs caught up. Once, I was crawling out of the bathtub when I was swept with nausea. I scrambled for the toilet. Hearing the scuffle, my mom burst in to check on me. And so it was that in late middle age, I found myself buck naked on all fours, head in the toilet, puking at the feet of dear old Mom. She's been a nurse for 40 years and was unfazed, but a guy hopes for a little dignity. So I'm going to cut ahead now to the conclusion. I'm not going to read the whole essay to you, but before I get to what I refer to as the glorious conclusion, there are just two little bits of information that I have to share with you so the ending makes sense. And the first is that when you have a kidney stone, they want you to catch the kidney stone and keep it. And then you bring it back in and they crush it and they analyze it. And then, based on the chemical composition, they give you dietary recommendations, which you then ignore. And so in order to accomplish this, they give you, as you leave the ER, a little plastic funnel. And in the bottom of the funnel is a stream. And there's really no delicate way to put this. You have to pee through the funnel every time, everywhere. And as I wrote, that's a problem because you really can't stand at a urinal in the farm and fleet, peeing through a funnel, and expect to escape arrest or injury. It was the Rice Lake Farm fleet. There was a big old logger right next to me, and he's not supposed to look, right? But he did. So everybody's like, well, I'm a logger, too awesome. The other little bit of information that you need in order for the ending to make sense is that my urologist, which is a phrase I frankly never anticipated uttering, my urologist, he's a smart guy. I like that, the urologist. But he's also, there's just no getting around it, he's geeky. He's this tall, skinny guy with big glasses, and geekiest of all, he gets really, really excited about your kidney stone, to the point where it leaves you feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I went to my first appointment, the kidney stone was still in me, and I sat down, and the RN came in, she took my health history and vitals, and she said, the doctor will be with you shortly, and sure enough, he comes to the urologist, he looks at my chart, and he gets his chair, he scoots up to me kind of knee-to-knee, and he goes, yes, kidney stone. Now, a kidney stone is not just a kidney stone. There are actually 19 variations of kidney stones. And I said, yeah, well, I've got the one that hurts. He then proceeds to explain and describe all the 19 variations of kidney stones, their shapes, their sizes, their origin, their chemical composition, all these details. He gets to the end of his 5-minute disquisition on the 19 variations of kidney stones. He says, and last year at the American Association of Urologists Convention, they announced the discovery of a 20th variation. I said, well, man, that had to be the talk of the convention. I don't know how you guys got anything done after that. So just so the ending makes sense, you need to know that my urologist is a geek for renal calculi. So this is the conclusion. This also is the personal part. I was caught completely off guard when it finally happened. I was visiting friends. We were leaving to see a band, and I had run upstairs for a quick, filtered pee. Urinating through a sifter was second nature by now, and my mind was somewhere else when boring. There was a sudden rubbery back pressure, my urine flow stopped dead, my bladder expanded, then clack, and I was peeing effortlessly again. You know, sometimes if you turn the faucet off too quick, the pipes rattle. Firefighters have a term for that. It's called water hammer. When that kidney stone hit the old home stretch, I had my own little water hammer moment. And now there it was, dark brown, rock hard, and the size of a choke cherry pit. I had a sudden urge to call friends and hand out cigars. I went to my follow-up appointment. No sooner had he closed the examining room door than Dr. McZeppis turned to me eagerly. Did you bring it? It was like in third grade when Vince Bronsted wondered if you brought the fart cushion. I pulled the specimen bottle from my pocket and held it up to view. The stone rattled against the plastic. Dr. McZeppis' eyes widened. Oh my God. Can I tell you what pride it gives a man? To produce an object in this manner and have a board-certified urologist say, "Oh my God." I averted my eyes and flushed with awe, shucks, cried. Just as quickly I drew back. "I bet you tell all your patients that." "Oh no," he said, that really is a big one. Stones of that size, we usually have to go in after them." I was glowing. Well, I'm going to conclude now. Thanks so much for having me. I really mean, I'm sweatier and more nervous for this speaking engagement than anyone I've done in a year. But it's because I know a lot of people here, and I just am really, really, really grateful to be from here. In 2003, when I went digging back through my files, I recall that in 2003, they had me deliver, the high school seniors asked me to deliver the commencement address for their graduation year. And when I read through that speech, there wasn't necessarily a lot that was relevant to our get-together today, but I did find this one little bit entertaining, at least for me. At some point I said, "Class of 2003, I really don't know what to tell you. I graduated from New Auburn 20 years ago. With every passing year, I feel as if I know less and less. Life moves faster and faster. Your class motto reads, 'People say the easiest part of life is over and the hardest is yet to come.' We say, 'Bring it on.' And I say, 'Oh, it's a coming.'" And I remember when I did that line at the graduation ceremony, all the grown-ups laughed. The kids on the podium. So I used to get asked, especially after Population 45 came out, if I was going to live in New Auburn for the rest of my life. And back when I wrote Population 45, that was the plan. I loved it here. But of course, we all know what happens when you make plans. Life pulls us in different directions, and I'm grateful to say that I've had a wonderful, fascinating life for a kid who grew up on the wooden end of a pitchfork in the town of Sampson. Again, my brother's here, so I did, you would have found me on the wooden end of a pitchfork, but it wasn't until Dad found me and pried me up from underneath a Blue Lamar cowboy book. But I can say without reservation that wherever I wind up, whatever I do, it has always been a signal unmatched privilege to have been given a chance to be a small, transient part of this 150-year history. There are some of my old firefighting crew here today, and no matter what happens or where we wind up, we were brave together, we were scared together, we pulled off some miracles together, and every now and then we were in way over our heads together. On that evening back in 1905, when the New Auburn Area Fire Department was born, a modest little chapter of history was opened. And if I may speak on behalf of my fellow firefighters, men and women present and past, it's been our honor to have a small place in the story that's still being written. I once did a reading in a bookstore in New York City, and there were two people there who didn't know me. That's about the crowd I can draw in New York City. They couldn't have been nicer, very attentive, young guy on the edge of the seat, a young couple. And when he got to the question and answer period, he raised his hands. "I just have a question. If I came to your town and I went to the cafe and nobody knew that I wasn't from around there," and I just said, "Okay, you gotta stop right there." Because, they'd know. But from the time Population 45 came out in 2002, I pretty much haven't stopped running around the country talking about it. The book hasn't sold 1 million, but it has sold a surprising few truckloads. And over the past 23 years, hardly a week has gone by where someone didn't hand me a copy to sign, and tens of thousands of times I have written the same thing over and over. Welcome to Auburn. When I spoke to those graduating high schoolers in 2003, I told them, whether you leave, whether you stay, you will never be able to scrape all of the Auburn off your boots, and I think you'll be better for it. I know that I am. It has also been a privilege to be a part of New Auburn's 150-year history. I decided a long time ago that it is useless and counterproductive to try to claw the past into the present. But I do think it is important to acknowledge and honor that past and the people and places dear to us, the people and places who formed us, and New Auburn is that place to be. So the phrase I've used over and over and mean deeply every time I utter it is, wherever I'm standing when I say it, I am forever grateful to be of and from Auburn.
Mike is selling books over there, and he's going to sign them just the way he told you. So I'd love to be able to whittle all your piles down to nothing and get to that million with the folks here. Thank you so much, Mike. We now on the schedule was time to open the time capsule. Well, if you look over at the time capsule, which I mean, I don't know how they could have sealed that thing any better, but it was rather damp. So they did crack that open. The time capsule is from 50 years ago. 50 years ago, so about 1975. And the items are up here for you to look at, but we didn't do a live reveal because there was a lot of wet stuff happening. So as we wrap up today, just a reminder of some of the other events happening this weekend.